You raise a glass without thinking twice about it. Wine with dinner, beer after work, a toast at a wedding. It feels like something modern, built around bottles and labels and bars with neon signs. But alcohol is not a modern invention. It might not even be a human invention. The story starts long before there were humans at all. To understand why, you need to go back millions of years. Long before agriculture, long before fire, long before anything you would recognize as a human ancestor. Picture a forest floor covered in fallen fruit. Some of that fruit has been sitting there for days. Sugar inside it has started to break down, turned into alcohol by wild yeast in the air. That fruit now smells sharp and a little sour. To most animals, that smell means one thing: ripe, ready, and worth eating right now before something else gets to it. In 2014, biologist Matthew Kerrigan, then at Santa Fe College, studied a gene called ADH4 across dozens of primate species. That gene controls an enzyme that breaks down alcohol in the body. Kerrigan found that around 10 million years ago, a single mutation appeared in the shared ancestor of humans, chimpanzees, and gorillas. That mutation made the enzyme 40 times more efficient at processing ethanol, the alcohol found in fermented fruit. In plain terms, an ancestor you share with every great ape alive today gained the ability to safely eat and digest alcohol long before anyone was fermenting anything on purpose. This idea has a name: biologist Robert Dudley of the University of California. Berkeley calls it the Drunken monkey hypothesis. His argument is simple. Fruit that has begun to ferment is often the most abundant, most calorie-dense food available on a forest floor. An ancestor that could smell that alcohol from a distance and safely eat the fruit once it found it had an edge over one that could not. Getting slightly better at tolerating alcohol was not about seeking out a buzz. It was about not missing a meal. So long before anyone brewed anything, your ancestors were already built, quite literally, to handle small amounts of alcohol. The taste for it did not start in a cup. It started on the forest floor, sniffing out fruit gone soft and sweet with rot. This is not just a theory pieced together from old bones and gene sequences. It has been observed happening in the wild, in real time. Primatologist Kimberly Hawkins, working with chimpanzees in Bissau, Guinea, documented wild chimpanzees repeatedly drinking naturally fermented palm sap, sometimes measuring around 3% alcohol by volume, roughly the strength of a light beer. The chimpanzees used chewed leaves as makeshift sponges, dipping them into the sap and sucking out the liquid, then returning to do it again. Some individuals were observed drinking enough, repeatedly enough, that researchers described visible behavioral effects afterward. This was not an isolated accident. It was a learned, repeated behavior passed between individuals in the group. That single observation closes an important gap. It shows that drinking fermented, alcohol-containing liquid on purpose is not something that required human intelligence, human culture, or human technology to begin. A close living relative of yours does it too, using a simple tool it taught itself to make. The biological hardware for tolerating alcohol, paired with a taste for what that fermentation smell signals, was apparently enough on its own to produce deliberate drinking behavior, long before anyone was capable of asking why they liked it. Now fast forward, past millions of years of evolution, past the first stone tools, past the first fires, all the way to a specific cave in what is now northern Israel. In 2018, archaeologist Li Liu of Stanford University led a team examining stone mortars found in Rakfet Cave, used by a hunter-gatherer culture called the Natufians, roughly 13,000 years ago. These mortars were carved directly into the bedrock of the cave floor. When Liu's team analyzed the residue left inside them, they found starch granules that showed clear signs of malting, mashing, and fermentation. In other words, this was not just stored grain. This looks like deliberate beer. That date matters enormously. 13,000 years ago is before full-scale farming existed in that region. The Natufians were still largely hunter-gatherers, yet they were already grinding wild grain, soaking it, and letting it ferment into something alcoholic. That timing has pushed some researchers to argue that the desire to brew alcohol may have been one of the reasons people started deliberately cultivating grain in the first place, rather than beer being a side effect that came later after farming was already established. Picture the scene at Rakafet Cave. Stone basins carved into rock, worn smooth by repeated use, grains soaking inside them, slowly turning starchy water into something bubbling and slightly sour. People gathered nearby, not for a harvest festival exactly, but for something that served a similar purpose, a reason to sit together, to share a limited resource, to mark that this moment was different from an ordinary meal. Move forward again, roughly 2,000 years, to a hilltop in what is now southeastern Turkey. Göbekli Tepe is one of the oldest known monumental sites on Earth, built around 11,600 years ago, long before Stonehenge, long before the pyramids. Archaeologist Oliver Dietrich, working with the German Archaeological Institute, identified large stone vats at the site with a capacity of over 150 liters each. Chemical residue analysis found calcium oxalate, a compound that forms during the brewing of cereal-based beverages like beer. Here is where the twist comes in. Göbekli Tepe was not a village. There is no strong evidence anyone lived there permanently. It appears to have been a gathering place, a site people traveled to, likely to take part in shared rituals and feasting. Dietrich's team has proposed that brewing beer in massive quantities at Göbekli Tepe was tied directly to those gatherings. Large batches of alcohol may have been part of what made people willing to travel long distances, work together to move massive stone pillars, and build something on a scale that hunter-gatherer societies were not thought to be capable of. That reframes the entire question. Alcohol was not simply a pleasant accident that appeared after agriculture solved the problem of feeding people. In some cases, it may have been the reason people cooperated on the scale needed to build permanent structures at all. A shared drink, brewed in enormous stone vats, may have helped hold together groups of strangers long enough to raise stone pillars twice the height of a person. Put these three pieces together and a different picture forms. 10 million years ago, an ancestor of every great ape alive today gained the biological ability to tolerate alcohol, most likely because it made rotting fruit a reliable food source. 13,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers in a cave in modern Israel were already deliberately fermenting grain into something like beer, possibly before farming itself had fully taken hold. And 11,600 years ago, at one of the oldest monumental sites ever built, massive quantities of beer may have helped bind strangers together long enough to build something permanent. Alcohol, in other words, did not arrive after civilization was already running. In some of the oldest evidence we have, it looks like alcohol may have helped build civilization in the first place. Think about that the next time you raise a glass at a wedding, a work event, or a holiday dinner. The instinct to gather around a shared drink, to use it as a reason to sit together and mark an occasion, is not something that started with bars or bottles. It may be one of the oldest social habits your species has, older than farming, older than permanent buildings, tied to a gene mutation that first let a distant ancestor stomach a piece of rotting fruit without getting sick. Three separate lines of evidence, from three completely different fields, all point the same direction. A gene shared with every great ape. Wild chimpanzees choosing to drink fermented sap on purpose. Hunter-gatherers carving stone basins to brew grain into beer before farming had fully arrived. None of these groups were trying to invent a party. They were following a signal written into biology millions of years before the first cup was ever raised. You raise a glass without thinking twice about it. Maybe you should. Somewhere behind that simple gesture is 10 million years of biology and 13,000 years of people deciding that some moments are worth marking together. If stories like this one make you see your own everyday life differently, hit subscribe. A new story from the deep past goes up every week.